Hello, dear students. Today we will learn about the anatomy of the thalamus. Thalamus is an egg-shaped nucleus found in the almost in the center of the cerebrum. This analogy with the egg is very useful for us to understand the anatomy of the thalamus. This is the outline of today's class. I'll deal with the introduction, location and relations, and the nuclear groups of the thalamus. This comes under what I call as anatomy, and then the functional, that is the thalamic connections. This is the functional aspect, and then the clinical aspect, which includes blood supply and clinical anatomy. So these are the three segments that I will deal in today's class. First will be in coded in blue color, then the orange color, and then the green color. Okay, first, thalamus is an important relay center. You may have learned in your school that thalamus is a very important sensory relay station, right? It's true, but not only for sensations. It is a very important sensory relay station, but not only for sensation. It also has a motor relay station. I'll explain that in a word because this is the cerebellum. Cerebellum will not connect directly to the cerebrum. It will connect only through the thalamus to the cerebrum. You might have heard about the dentate to rubro-thalamo-cortical loop. Okay, that is how the dentate nucleus of the cerebellum will communicate to the cortex and modulate the cortex. It is through the thalamus. So thalamus is again a relay station there. Basal ganglia also does not connect directly to the cerebral cortex, but only through the thalamus. It will modulate the thalamic activity and thus modulate movements. So this is a very important aspect of how movement is controlled both by cerebellum and basal ganglia. It is through the thalamus. Not only motor, but also limbic circuits reach the thalamus. The reticular system also reaches the thalamus. So it is a very important relay station, not only sensory, but also motor, limbic, and reticular parts. Now, coming about the locations and relations, as you can see, this is the location of the thalamus. Okay, the relations that you need to know here is that below that, this region is the hypothalamus. Okay, hypothalamus and thalamus can be kind of separated by this sulcus. This faint sulcus is called the hypothalamic sulcus. Okay, yeah, this faint sulcus. Here you can see that extending from the aqueduct of Sylvius. This is the aqueduct of Sylvius. So from there you can see the sulcus going like this. Below that, this hatched area, that is the hypothalamus, and above that, this much region is the thalamus. It can be a spotter here. Okay, this is the coronal section. In the coronal section also, you need to know that this is the thalamus, and this is the other side thalamus, and between that you are seeing the third ventricle. What I've shaded here blue is the CSF filled third ventricle. So it is on flanking the both sides of the third ventricle. And here the relations of the thalamus is also important. Above you are seeing the caudate nucleus. Laterally you are seeing the internal capsule fiber, and lateral to that you are seeing the lentiform nucleus. All these are very important relations. Here in this axial section also you can see the location of the thalamus. The thalamus is shaped like an egg, as I told before. This is the anterior part of that egg. Okay, and this is the posterior part of that egg. The right thalamus, and this is the left thalamus if you are looking at the section from above. Okay, and look at the relations over here. Medially you have the third ventricle again, and laterally you have the internal capsule. The caudate is above and in front and above the thalamus, and lateral to the internal capsule you again have the lentiform nucleus. So these are the very important relations and the location. The location is almost kind of centrally located. Okay, it is almost in the center of the. Now, as I said before, there are two thalami. This is one thalamus. I'll take another ink here. This is one thalamus. This is another thalamus, and if you look carefully, the long axis of the thalamus is going like this. The long axis of this thalamus is going like this, making an approximate V. Okay, this relation is kind of important. The anterior ends of the thalamus, which I am shading now, they are very close together. But the posterior ends of the thalamus, which I am shading now, are much farther away. That is why it creates a V-shaped appearance. In between that, you are seeing the third ventricle here. Okay, this posterior end of the thalamus is called as pulvinar. Pulvinar, P-U-L-V-I-N-A-R, pulvinar. So the pulvinars are little lateral. If you compare the both sides, pulvinars are a little more lateral. The anterior tubercle of the thalamus are very close to each other. Now, if you look at a scan again, you can see that thalamus is occupying almost in the center. Okay, that's why thalamic tumors are pretty difficult to approach because it is in the center of the brain. Now coming to the nuclear groups, I've already shared a video about the nuclear groups, how we can study it, how we can learn it. Okay, suppose this is the right thalamus and this is the left thalamus, okay, and this is anterior and this is posterior. Then this one that you see here, as I showed before, this is the right thalamus. It is viewed from the right side and behind. You have to see the other video if you have a confusion about how to draw this and how to understand this. And this is an axis that is showing the anterior and the posterior end. This is dorsal and ventral. Okay, so it looks superior and inferior, that is correct, but in thalamus we need to use the term dorsal and ventral to understand that. So in the thalamus, the upper structures are dorsal, the lower structures are ventral. It's a very important relation to tell like that. And here it is the medial and lateral ends. Okay, this is the medial and lateral sides. So that is how this diagram is oriented. It is actually a view from the right side. The right thalamus is viewed from the right side and a little behind. That is how you are viewing this picture. It is a picture from Gray's Anatomy. Now, let us just go through this nuclei. I've already covered that in the previous video. This is the anterior nucleus. This is the dorsomedial nucleus. And this is the midline nucleus. As you know, there are three groups of nuclei. This is the medial group of nuclei. This is the anterior group of nuclei. And this is the lateral group of nuclei. Okay, these are the three groups of nuclei which are divided by this Y-shaped internal medullary lamina. Okay, I'll draw that here. This is the this is the internal medullary lamina. I have just cut through the internal medullary lamina, and that is dividing it into 1, 2, and 3 nuclear groups. These are nuclear groups. That's how we study this. So the individual nuclei are anterior nucleus in the anterior nuclear group, the dorsomedial and the midline nuclei in the medial group. In the lateral group, you have ventral tire. Over here, this is the ventral tire. Over here, this is the dorsal tire. Okay, let us have a look at those names. This is the ventral anterior, this is the ventral lateral, and this is the ventral posterolateral and the ventral posterior medial. Together you call it as the VP, ventral posterior nucleus. So you can see here, this is VA, this is VL, and this is VP. VP is further divided into VPL and VPM. This is very important because if you have learned in physiology, into VPL you have the sensory projections, the dorsal column, spinothalamic, all those fibers are coming to the VPL. VPL is the third order nucleus of all the dorsal column medial lemniscal pathway that you learned, or the spinothalamic pathway that you learned. For everything you have learned that VPL is the location of the third order neuron. Okay, and VPM is important because it is conveying the trigeminothalamic tract. Okay, the trigeminothalamic tract will be reaching here. So the head and neck sensations, head and neck sensory input is all processed in VPM. Okay, so that's why these ventral tires are very important in your physiology. Now, dorsal tire, you have a lateral dorsal, lateral posterior, and the pulvinar. And posteriorly, you can see these two bumps. Okay, these two bumps are very important. They are the medial geniculate body and the lateral geniculate body. Medial geniculate body is concerned with music. Okay, you can remember like that, M for music, medial geniculate body, music. It's actually a part of the auditory pathway. And LGB, it is for light. Okay, LGB, light, L for light, because it is part of the visual pathway. LGB is part of the visual pathway, MGB is part of the auditory pathway. So these are the main nuclear groups. Now within this internal medullary lamina, which I mentioned before, within that also you have a couple of nuclei. Inside that white matter lamina, you have a centromedian nucleus over here, and also a group of intralaminar nuclei within it. So these are the diverse groups in the thalamic egg. And covering this thalamic egg, can you see this dotted or the dashed curve over here? Okay, that is a structure that is actually kind of covering the thalamus from the lateral side. Okay, this is actually a shield like covering of the thalamus, that is called the thalamic reticular nucleus. Okay, this is called thalamic reticular nucleus. It is not part of the reticular formation, but this is called TRN, thalamic reticular nucleus. Now let us learn about the connections of the thalamus. It can be learned under three headings. One is a specific connection or a specific relay station. Then specific nuclei or relay nuclei. Then you have association nuclei and you have diffuse nuclei. Now what comes under specific nuclei? I told you about the VP, the ventral posterior, which has us two subnuclei, the VPL and VPM. Then the MGB, LGB, VA and VL, and the anterior. These are all specific because they are going to specific regions of the cerebral cortex. Okay. For example, VPL and VPM is going towards the postcentral gyrus, the sensory cortices, right? The postcentral gyrus, the primary sensory area, that will be the target. MGB will be going to the primary auditory area. From the MGB, the fibers are projection to the primary auditory area, that is the Heschel's gyrus and the transverse temporal gyrus. LGB, lateral geniculate body, is projecting into the occipital cortex around the calcarine sulcus. That is the striate cortex, that is the primary visual area. Primary visual area. This is the primary auditory area. Okay, now VA and VL is going to the premotor and the other frontal lobe areas which are concerned with motor activity. That is the projection of VA and VL. So they are all going to specific areas. That's why they are called specific nuclei or relay nuclei. Anterior nucleus is an important limbic circuitry because from the anterior nucleus, the fibers are going towards the cingulate gyrus. That's why it is part of the pappus circuit. From the mammillary body, you have a mammillothalamic tract, and from the thalamus, you have from the anterior nucleus of thalamus, you have the fibers going towards the cingulate gyrus. So these are the typical relay nucleus. Now, what are the association nuclei? They are more kind of going towards more association areas. For example, dorsomedial nuclei goes to a lot of prefrontal cortices. Okay, prefrontal cortices. They are projection towards the prefrontal cortices. Lateral dorsal, lateral pulvinar, lateral posterior and pulvinar are projecting into large areas of parietal and occipital cortices. Okay, parietal and occipital cortices, which are concerned with attention. Then also what we call as extrastriate cortices for attention, vision, visual processing, etc. is called the secondary association areas in the parietal and the occipital areas. So that is the region, parietal and occipital cortices. That is the region where LD, LP and pulvinar is projecting. Now there are also diffuse projections, which are the intralaminar nuclei, which you remember, which was found inside the internal medullary lamina, and also thalamic reticular nucleus. They are all diffusely projecting. So you have to, when your thalamus is asked as a short note, you have to draw this diagram. You have to draw the individual nuclear groups and the individual nuclei. With that diagram, you have to classify the nuclei as a relay, association, and into diffuse. Okay, a relay means they go to specific areas in the cortices. Association means into a larger, more wider areas of the cortices. Diffuse means they go very diffusely into all of the parts of the cortices. Okay. Now these are the pictures which we can help to understand how this relay nuclei are going. Okay, how they are projecting. For example, I told you the relay nuclei, you have VP. Can you identify VP? This is the VP. Now VP nucleus has two parts. One, this is the VPL, right? And this is the VPM. And you can see that they are projecting towards the postcentral gyrus. This is the postcentral gyrus, right? Because this is the central sulcus, right? Yes, this is the central sulcus. So this will be the postcentral gyrus. And postcentral gyrus, you can see the area that is marked in the body, that is by the VPL, that is in the upper part, and below you are having the VPM projections. So they are projecting to specific areas. Now let us look at the medial geniculate body. Medial geniculate body is projecting into Heschel's gyrus. Heschel's gyrus is located here. Okay, this is the location of Heschel's gyrus. So that's how the medial geniculate body is projected. Next is the lateral geniculate body. As you know, lateral geniculate body is concerned with vision. That means it is around the calcarine sulcus. That is what you are seeing here. This is the region around the calcarine sulcus. So that is where LGB will be projected. Now VA and VL. VA is here and VL is here. They are concerned with motor activities. Now let us have a look how it is projecting. See, this is projecting into this color, and this orange is color projecting to this region. That means it is projecting to motor, primary motor area as well as premotor areas. Okay, that is how specific relay nuclei are projecting to specific parts of the brain. This is the picture from Gray's Anatomy. Anterior nucleus is also important. This is the anterior nucleus. As I said before, anterior nucleus is a part of the pappus circuit which projects onto the cingulate gyrus. You can see the cingulate gyrus here. So it is projecting onto that. It is part of the Papa circuit. Now coming to the rest of the nuclei, association nuclei, you have dorsomedial nucleus. You can see here dorsomedial nucleus. It is going into wider areas of the prefrontal cortex. So the prefrontal cortex is popularly known as the executive region of your brain because that is concerned with abstract thinking, judgment, drive. So that is all done by dorsomedial nucleus. Lateral dorsal, lateral pulvinar, and lateral posterior and pulvinar. That is this region. Okay, the green region and the blue region is what you are seeing. The large areas of parietal, occipital, and even a large area of temporal. That is how it is projecting more into wider regions, more into the wider association cortices. That is how the dorsomedial nucleus, this one dorsomedial nucleus, and the lateral dorsal, lateral posterior, and pulvinar, they are projecting. These are the association nuclei. Now let's look at the next. This diffuse non-specific nuclei, that is the intralaminar nuclei and the thalamic reticular nuclei. Intralaminar nuclei are located here. That will be projecting onto the cortex. Okay, wide projection onto the cortex. There is no specific color. It is widely projecting into the cortex. Now the thalamic reticular nucleus is widely projecting. As you can see here, intralaminar nucleus here. Okay, this is the intralaminar nucleus. From there, it is widely projecting onto the. It's very important in the reticular activating system. This is the reticular activating system in the cranial end of the brainstem. From there, it goes to both the thalamus and projects to both cortices. It's very important to our attention, our consciousness, the state of awareness for all of this. This is very important. Intralaminar nucleus. Thalamic reticular nucleus is kind of a regulator of the thalamic output. So you can see thalamic output is going like this, and it is giving off a collateral to the thalamic reticular nucleus, which is like a shield on the lateral part of the thalamus. This is where you have the thalamus. Okay, so lateral part of that you are seeing this, and I'll clear this off to make that more clearer. This is the thalamocortical projection. It is giving off a branch to the, a collateral to the thalamic reticular nucleus. There in the reticular nucleus, you can see fibers which are inhibiting this. Okay, so that is how this loop functions. And this is, as you can see, this is a corticothalamic fiber, which is kind of more numerous than the thalamocortical projection. So these are the different. Till now, we learned about the different connections of the nuclei to different regions of the cortex. Now we are going to learn about something called thalamic peduncles or thalamic radiations. As you can see, this is the thalamus, and the thalamus is connected by large group of fibers to the superior aspect, to the posterior aspect, to the inferior aspect, and to the anterior aspect, or in more terms of the brain anatomy, into the frontal lobe, into the parietal lobe and the posterior part of the frontal lobe, into the occipital lobe, and into the temporal lobe, right? So these are called thalamic peduncles, also called thalamic radiations. Okay, for example, we learned that this is the thalamus, which contains the anterior nuclear group here. This will be the lateral nuclear group will be on the lateral side. Okay, and the medial nuclear group will be on the medial side. We learned about different nuclear groups in that. You remember that from the dorsomedial nucleus. From the dorsomedial nucleus, you had a projection onto the prefrontal cortex. So that will go through the anterior thalamic radiation. Or from the VPL nucleus onto the postcentral gyrus, that will go through the superior thalamic radiation. We learned about the lateral geniculate nucleus projecting onto the calcarine sulcus, onto the visual cortex. That will go through the posterior thalamic peduncle, through the posterior thalamic radiation. We also learned about the medial geniculate body projecting onto the to the transverse temporal gyrus, to the auditory cortex. That will go through the inferior thalamic radiation. So these are kind of territories. All these four peduncles are kind of white matter territories through which the nuclei will be projecting onto the cortices. So the nucleus, the thalamus, is connected to the cortex through these four peduncles. Okay. Now in another aspect, last day dissection we had a white matter dissection, right? So in white matter dissection, you remember there was the internal capsule. This, what you see here, is the internal capsule. Okay, with the anterior limb here. This is the genu, and this is the posterior limb, and this is the retrolendiform part of the posterior limb, beyond the posterior limb. So these are the parts of the internal capsule. Next day you will learn about the white matter anatomy, and in that you will learn that internal capsule contains fiber components, and one of the fiber components is the this is the thalamus, thalamocortical projection and the corticothalamic projection. All of them will go through the anterior limb, through the posterior limb, through the retrolendiform part. Okay, all of them. So all these pedungles are actually kind of contained within the internal capsule, in different parts of the internal capsule. I'll just give you an illustration, a very important example. You can see the lateral geniculate nucleus here of the thalamus. From there, can you see the fibers going backwards? This is the retrolendiform part of the internal capsule. And retrolendiform part of the internal capsule is containing the optic radiation, the fibers that are coming from the lateral geniculate nucleus towards occipital cortex. Now this is the same part, this is the same structure that is contained within the posterior thalamic radiation. I told you that the thalamus is projecting onto the occipital cortex through here. Okay, this is very important, because if you have, suppose you have a lesion in this part, in the retrolendiform part, you have a stroke involving the retrolendiform part of the internal capsule, it will affect the visual pathway that is coming from the geniculate nucleus towards the occipital cortex, also called as the optic radiation. It will cause a field effect on the opposite side. So this is why thalamic radiations or internal capsule is all important. So coming back to the thalamus topic, the thalamus is connected by the posterior fibers like this onto the cortex, and this is the same structure that you see in a section of the brain that you see here, a section of the brain in which you are seeing the thalamus connected to the posterior aspect to the retrolendiform part. Okay, this is about how thalamic peduncles are attached to the thalamus and connecting them to the cortex. Now coming to the blood supply, going to the clinical aspect. In the clinical aspect, the blood supply is mainly by, let me just orient you to this picture. What you see here as red color, okay, this red colored structure, that is the thalamus. Okay, and this is all the lentiform nucleus and the caudate. This is the basal ganglia thalamic complex. The ganglionic complex, or the basal nuclear complex is what is shown here, and the blood supply to that. Okay, what you see here is the anterior circulation, what you see here is the posterior circulation. So the thalamus is mainly supplied by posterior circulation branches. There are two important arteries that you need to know: thalamoperforator branches and thalamogeniculate arteries. Thalamogeniculate arteries and thalamoperforator branches, these two are branches of the posterior circulation. What is posterior circulation? Basilar artery dividing into the two posterior cerebrals. That segment is called the posterior circulation. Let us have a look at the blood supply of the brain. This will be taught to you in detail later, but you already saw it in the first dissection. This is the anterior spine, the two vertebral arteries. The two vertebral arteries joining to form the basilar artery, dividing into the two posterior cerebral arteries. This part is called the posterior circulation. So it is from here you get the blood supply to the thalamus. For example, thalamoperforator and thalamogeniculate are branches from this aspect of the posterior circulation, from this part of the posterior circulation. Okay, so that is about the blood supply. Now we'll go to the clinical conditions that are associated with thalamus. I have three clinical conditions that you need to know. One is a thalamic stroke. So this is a case where a 62-year-old person, right-handed woman, is coming to the medical clinic because of 2 days of numbness in her right face, arm and leg. So there is a peculiar lesion, I mean a presentation where there is sensory symptoms for 2 days. Okay, 2 days. So when an MRI was done, you can see an increased signal in this part. So if you see like that, you know that this is the thalamus, right? Initially I showed you a scan image and I showed you how thalamus is located in the central part of the brain. So that is the thalamus, and in that thalamus you can see a lesion over here. Okay, this much part is the lesion. I'll clear that off. Okay, this is the internal capsule. You can see the internal capsule here. This is the caudate nucleus and this is the lentiform. This appearance is very important, not only in first year but also in clinics. When you see images, you have to look at this anatomy to understand what these structures are. Okay, this is the caudate. This is the thalamus. So in the thalamus lateral aspect, you are seeing a lesion. So that may have affected the ventral posterior nucleus. That is because this is on the lateral side. This is the lateral group of nucleus. This may be the VP nucleus is affected. That is why the presentation is typically on the opposite side. This is the right hand, right? This is an MRI image. You are seeing the right side here. You are seeing the left side here. So this is the left thalamic lateral aspect stroke that has caused a right-handed symptom. Or all the sensations are crossing the brain. You have learned that in physiology in detail. It was decussating in the medulla, in the mid-medulla. It was decussating, and it is going towards the left-sided thalamus. Okay, left-sided thalamus. Don't get confused by this image. In a scan image, the right side is here and the left side is here. Okay, in the scan image, everything is rotated. You are seeing at the upper section through the by looking from the inferior aspect. So everything here is right, everything here is left. Okay, so this is a left-sided thalamic stroke causing right-sided symptoms. Next, we go to another clinical condition called Dejerine-Roussy syndrome, also called the thalamic pain syndrome or the central pain syndrome. In the earlier case, in a thalamic stroke, you were seeing only what you call affliction of the thalamic of sensations. That is what you saw, afflictions of the sensation, sensory. There is numbness on one side, on the right side, due to left-sided thalamic stroke. What you see here is not just loss of sensations; it is severe pain. Okay, severe pain in a chronic pattern. There is severe pain. So this is called Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. There were two French clinicians French neurologists who found out this. It's called they are called Dejerine and Roussy. Okay, Dejerine-Roussy discovered something called the thalamic syndrome in 1906. Okay, well, the thing is that there was a thalamic stroke, and after that thalamic stroke or any insult to the thalamus, and after that, due to multiple regenerations or thalamic neural plasticity within the brain, it caused multiple connections which caused in a abnormal processing of pain pathways. Even a touch will be sensed as pain. So severe pain is the symptom in a Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. It is a chronic syndrome. The other one is a stroke which presented within 2 days. This is a chronic syndrome which will present after months to years. Okay, that is called thalamic pain syndrome or Dejerine-Roussy syndrome. The next third clinical condition that you need to write is thalamic hand. Thalamic hand is not completely understood why this mechanism occurs, but there is a typical posture. There is an abnormal posturing of the thalamus. The forearm will be pronated, the wrist will be flexed, there is metacarpal joints are flexed, interphalangeal joints are extended. Okay, that appearance may be due to altered muscle tone in different muscle groups, because as you know, thalamus is not only concerned with sensations, but also, as I said before, VA and VL are very important relay stations for motor activity, right? The basal ganglia and the cerebellum was projecting onto the VA and VL. So that is all important in tone, that is important in movement coordination, that is important in movement control, planning. For everything, thalamic activity is very important. So that is the part that is affected in a thalamic hand posturing. Okay, that is called thalamic hand. So I mentioned 3 clinical importance. One is the thalamic stroke, next is the Dejerine-Roussy syndrome, and the next is the thalamic hand. So with that, we will summarize what we have learned. First, I introduced about the thalamus, its central location, and how it is a relay station, not only for sensory, but also motor, limbic, okay, different activities. I mentioned about that. Then I mentioned about the location and the relations, how it is centrally located and how the relations are. It is related to the third ventricle, right? You can see in this image, it is related to the third ventricle. I forgot to mention before, it is also related to the lateral ventricle. You are seeing the lateral ventricle here. You are seeing the third ventricle here. Okay, here what you are seeing is the fornix. Okay, I told you that superiorly you had caudate as a relation. So it is actually superolaterally. Superolaterally caudate is related. Superiorly you have the lateral ventricle. Medially you have the third ventricle. And laterally you are seeing the internal capsule relation. Okay, laterally internal capsule was related. And the nuclear groups of the thalamus, I mentioned all the details of it, including a video. You have to see that video and reproduce that diagram in your exam. This was the anatomical aspect that we learned. Then we learned about the functional aspect, especially the connections to different part of the cortices. We classified the nuclei into not only into the anatomical groups, that is the medial, anterior and lateral group, but we classified that functionally also according to connections. We classified that into relay nuclei or specific nuclei, into association nuclei connecting to larger areas. For example, mediodorsal, lateral dorsal, lateral pulvinar and lateral posterior and pulvinar groups. Projecting into larger areas, and also diffuse groups, for example, thalamic reticular nucleus and the intralaminar nucleus. We then learned about the clinical importance by learning the blood supply, the thalamoperforator and thalamo-geniculate arteries coming from the posterior circulation, right? Thalamo-geniculate and thalamoperforator coming from the posterior circulation here. And also the clinical anatomy, that is the thalamic stroke, Dejerine-Roussy syndrome, and about the thalamic hand. Okay. So these were the things that we learned today. I hope it is not a physical class, it is a PowerPoint class, but I hope it was effective for you. If you have any doubt, please feel free to contact me. These are my references. You can contact me either through email or through phone.